The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as Admiral Zethkar's 6 eyes focused on the holographic display floating before the assembled delegates. The blue-skinned Altarian's gills fluttered nervously as he processed the impossible data streaming from the battlefield sensors. "This cannot be accurate," whispered Counselor Vexani, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's soft lighting into rainbow patterns across the walls. "The readings show impossible biological signatures. 3 days ago, the hegemony had launched what should have been the final assault on the last free world in the Outer Rim. Earth, they called it. A small, unremarkable planet that had somehow managed to resist the galaxy's most powerful military force for nearly 6 months. The humans who inhabited this world were known to be stubborn, but their technology was primitive, their weapons crude, and their military forces scattered. The hegemony's war machine had crushed 1,000 worlds. Their bio-enhanced soldiers were bred for combat. Their weapons could level continents, and their tactical AI could predict enemy movements with 97% accuracy. Victory against these primitive humans should have taken mere hours, but the data streaming into the council chamber told a different story entirely. "Replay the footage from Sector 7, Admiral Zethkar commanded, his voice barely concealing his bewilderment. The holographic display shifted, showing a smoking battlefield where hegemony forces had established what they believed to be an impenetrable forward position. Massive war machines, each the size of a building, had carved through the human defensive lines like scythes through grain. The locals had retreated, leaving behind smoking ruins and scattered equipment. Then something impossible happened. From the tree line emerged figures that the bioscanners initially dismissed as elderly humans. Their hair was gray or white, their faces lined with deep creases, and many moved with the careful gait of advanced age. By hegemony standards, these beings should have been in care facilities, not on battlefields. The first hegemony soldier to encounter them had actually lowered his weapon, confused by the apparent non-threat. That soldier was now a casualty statistic. "Focus on the human-designated target Alpha," the Admiral instructed. The display zoomed in on a human male who appeared to be in his 70s by Earth standards. His back was slightly bent, and he leaned heavily on what appeared to be an old-fashioned projectile weapon. Scars crisscrossed his weathered face, and his eyes held a peculiar intensity that made several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Watch what happens when he encounters the hegemony assault squad. The footage showed the elderly human moving with surprising speed as 3 bio-enhanced soldiers, each standing 8 feet tall and weighing over 400 pounds, advanced on his position. Instead of fleeing or surrendering as the tactical computers had predicted, the old man smiled. That smile chilled the assembled aliens to their core. What followed defied every principle of modern warfare the Galactic Council understood. The elderly human moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for his apparent age, flowing between the massive soldiers like water around stones. His ancient weapon barked repeatedly, each shot finding gaps in armor that the bioenhancement process should have eliminated. But it wasn't just his accuracy that disturbed the watching aliens. It was the complete absence of fear in his movements, the calculated precision of someone who had done this countless times before, and the terrifying efficiency with which he neutralized threats that should have been insurmountable. "The bioscanners indicate extreme stress hormones in the hegemony soldiers," reported technician Malesh, her antennae twitching with nervous energy. "Their enhanced physiology is registering fear responses we've never seen before." "Fear?" Counselor Vexani's voice carried disbelief. "Hegemony biosoldiers are incapable of fear. Their emotional centers have been surgically modified. That's what makes this so disturbing," Admiral Zethkar replied grimly. "Continue the playback." The footage showed more elderly humans emerging from seemingly impossible positions. They moved through the battlefield like ghosts, appearing from shadows that shouldn't have provided cover, striking from angles that defied conventional tactics, and displaying a level of coordination that suggested decades of shared experience. One woman, her hair silver and her movements deliberate, single-handedly disabled a hegemony hover tank by exploiting a design flaw that shouldn't have been apparent to primitive eyes. Another man, supporting himself with a walking stick, led a squad of younger humans in a flanking maneuver that collapsed an entire hegemony platoon. "The psychological profile analysis is unprecedented," reported the Council's chief xenopsychologist, Dr. Kethmore, These humans display combat experience levels that should be impossible. Our data suggests some of them have been fighting continuously for longer than most of our species' entire lifespans. How is that possible? Demanded Admiral Zethkar. Earth appears to be what the humans call a Deathworld, Dr. Kethmore explained, his multiple arms gesturing at supporting data streams. Unlike the stable, peaceful environments where most sentient species evolved, Earth is characterized by constant environmental threats, predatory fauna, and recurring natural disasters. The humans didn't evolve for peace, they evolved for survival. The implications began to dawn on the assembled council members. Every other species in the galaxy had developed civilization by overcoming their hostile environments through technology and cooperation. They had moved beyond the need for individual combat skills generations ago. But humans had never stopped fighting. Their entire history was an unbroken chain of conflicts, from tribal warfare to global confrontations to the resistance against the hegemony itself. Each generation had learned from the previous one, passing down not just knowledge but hard-earned experience in the art of survival. These elderly humans, Dr. Kethmore continued, they're not just old. They're veterans of conflicts we cannot imagine. Their planet has been at war for their entire lives, and some of them have been fighting for longer than our entire recorded history. The footage continued to play, showing more impossible scenes. Hegemony soldiers, bred and trained to be the ultimate warriors, were being systematically outmaneuvered by humans who should have been in retirement homes. The bio-enhanced troops' superior strength and speed meant nothing against opponents who could predict their movements, exploit their weaknesses, and strike from directions they never anticipated. Counselors, Admiral Zethkar said quietly, I believe we have gravely underestimated the human species. We assumed their primitive technology made them weak. We failed to consider that their primitive technology meant they had never stopped evolving as warriors. The chamber remained silent as the implications of this revelation settled over the assembled delegates. They had encountered a species that had turned warfare into an art form, where even the elderly were more dangerous than their most elite soldiers. And somewhere on the battlefield below, those same elderly humans were proving that experience was the deadliest weapon in the galaxy. General Marcus Chen had seen many battlefields in his 73 years, but the sight before him still brought a grim smile to his weathered face. The hegemony forces had learned nothing from their first encounter with Earth's retirement brigade, as the younger soldiers had taken to calling them. The alien invaders still expected conventional warfare from a conventional enemy. They were about to be educated otherwise. Sarah, how's your arthritis today? Marcus asked the woman crouched beside him. Her silver hair tied back in a practical bun. Sarah Williams, 71 years old and veteran of more conflicts than most planets had ever seen, flexed her gnarled fingers around her rifle's grip. Oh, you know how it is. Aches like hell in this weather, but the adrenaline always makes it better. She peered through her scope at the advancing hegemony column. Besides, these alien boys need to learn some manners. The hegemony had sent their elite units this time. Towering bioconstructs that stood 12 feet tall, their bodies enhanced with redundant organ systems and armor-plated skin. Intelligence reports suggested these creatures could survive direct artillery hits and continue fighting. Their weapons could level city blocks, and their tactical coordination was supposedly flawless. Marcus had read those reports while sipping his morning coffee. It reminded him of similar claims made about other invincible enemies throughout history. The Nazis had called their tanks unstoppable. The Soviets had claimed their nuclear doctrine was foolproof. Corporate security forces had boasted about their cyber warfare capabilities. They had all learned the same hard lesson that these aliens were about to receive. Frank, you see that big ugly bastard with the energy cannon? Marcus called quietly to an elderly man positioned 50 meters to his left. Frank Rodriguez, age 75 and missing 2 fingers from a mine explosion decades earlier, adjusted his position slightly. The one that looks like a walking building? Yeah, I see him. Reminds me of those new tanks the Chinese rolled out back in '89. Same weak points too, Sarah observed. Heavy armor means limited mobility. Big weapons mean predictable firing positions. These aliens might be enhanced, but they still follow the basic rules of physics. Marcus nodded approvingly. This was why the younger generation, for all their enthusiasm and advanced training, couldn't match what his generation brought to the battlefield. The young soldiers knew tactics and strategy from textbooks and simulations. They understood modern warfare theory and advanced weapon systems. But Marcus and his contemporaries had learned a different kind of warfare. They had grown up in an era when Earth was still fighting itself, when humans had perfected the art of killing other humans with whatever tools were available. They had learned to find weaknesses in everything, to turn any environment into an advantage, and to never, ever assume that superior technology guaranteed victory. The hegemony bioconstructs moved forward with mechanical precision, their enhanced muscles propelling them across the battlefield at impressive speeds. Their tactical coordination was indeed flawless, each unit supporting the others in textbook formations that would have overwhelmed any conventional military force. But Earth's defenders weren't conventional. Remember, kids, Frank's voice carried across their communication channel with paternal amusement. These big boys are used to facing enemies who fight fair. Time to show them what 70 years of human ingenuity looks like. The first surprise came when the hegemony advance triggered what appeared to be old-fashioned landmines. The bioconstruct's armor easily withstood the explosions, just as their designers had intended. But the mines weren't meant to kill. They were meant to channel the enemy into specific paths that Marcus and his team had spent 3 days preparing. The second surprise came when the channeled bioconstructs found themselves walking through what seemed like empty terrain. Their enhanced senses detected no immediate threats. Their tactical computers found no obvious ambush points, and their weapons remained ready for conventional engagement. They never saw the cables. Sarah had learned the technique during urban conflicts in the 2040s. Thin, nearly invisible wires stretched between strategic points at precise heights, not meant to stop a charging enemy, but to catch their feet at exactly the right moment. Physics did the rest. A 12-foot-tall bioconstruct falling at full speed created an impressive crater. More importantly, it created confusion in the enemy ranks as other units attempted to assist their fallen comrade. That's when the real lesson began. Marcus rose from his concealed position with the fluid motion of someone who had been ambushing enemies since before these aliens had left their homeworld. His weapon, an ancient design that most armies had abandoned decades ago, spoke with authority. The rounds weren't designed to penetrate the bioconstruct's armor. Instead, they carried specialized payloads that Frank had developed during his years as a military engineer. Each impact released a cloud of metallic particles that interfered with the aliens' enhanced sensory systems. Not enough to blind them completely, but enough to reduce their effectiveness by a crucial percentage. In warfare, percentages were often the difference between victory and defeat. 73 years old, Marcus muttered to himself as he moved to his next position, and I'm still teaching youngsters how to fight. The bioconstructs responded with devastating firepower, their energy weapons turning the landscape into a moonscape of craters and melted earth. But they were firing at positions their targets had already abandoned. Marcus and his team moved through the battlefield like smoke, never staying in one place long enough to be targeted, always striking from unexpected angles. Sarah's voice crackled through the communication channel. Marcus, remember that little trick we learned in Kazakhstan? The one with the atmospheric processors? Marcus grinned as he duck-walked through a drainage ditch that hadn't existed on any hegemony map. I was hoping you'd suggest that. The hegemony forces had superior technology, enhanced biology, and overwhelming firepower. But they had made the same mistake that many superior forces throughout history had made. They had assumed that their advantages were absolute. Marcus and his generation had learned better. They had learned that every advantage came with corresponding disadvantages, that every strength created exploitable weaknesses, and that the most dangerous enemy was often the one who appeared weakest. As the bioconstructs reorganized their formation and prepared for a more systematic advance, they were unaware that their atmospheric readings were being subtly altered by devices that Frank had cobbled together from civilian electronics. The modifications were so minor that the alien sensors barely registered them. But minor changes in atmospheric pressure and humidity could have major effects on energy weapon performance. Marcus had learned that lesson fighting corporate security forces who relied too heavily on their advanced equipment. Frank, how long until their weapons start malfunctioning? Sarah asked. About 3 more minutes, Frank replied cheerfully, assuming they keep firing at that rate. These enhanced boys sure do like their energy weapons. Marcus smiled grimly. The aliens were about to learn another hard lesson about warfare on Earth. Humans had been fighting wars with unreliable equipment for millennia. They had learned to adapt, improvise, and overcome when their weapons failed. But species that had always relied on superior technology often panicked when that technology betrayed them. The real battle was about to begin. Commander Thexanol of the Hegemony 3rd Assault Division had conquered 47 worlds in his distinguished military career. His bio-enhanced soldiers had faced every conceivable enemy, from the hive minds of Kepler 442b to the energy beings of the Vega system. Victory had always come through superior firepower, advanced tactics, and overwhelming technological advantage. But as he watched his elite bioconstructs stumble through the Earth battlefield like confused children, Thexanol experienced something his species had engineered out of their military caste centuries ago. Doubt. "Sir," his communications officer reported, her 6 arms working frantically across multiple control surfaces. "We're receiving contradictory data from the field units. Their weapon systems are reporting malfunctions, but our diagnostics show no technical failures." Thexanol's compound eyes focused on the tactical display, where red warning indicators were multiplying like a viral infection. "Explain. The bioconstruct's energy weapons are misfiring. Shot placement is off by increasing margins, power output is fluctuating, and targeting systems are reporting phantom readings." The officer's voice carried the confusion of someone whose reality was being systematically dismantled. "But according to our sensors, the atmospheric conditions are within normal parameters. Then why are our weapons failing?" Before the communications officer could respond, the battlefield provided its own answer. One of the massive bioconstructs, frustrated by his weapon's poor performance, switched to backup systems. The projectile launcher functioned perfectly, but the target he was aiming at had vanished, literally vanished. The human had been there a moment before, clearly visible in the open terrain. Then between one heartbeat and the next, he was gone, not hidden behind cover, not obscured by smoke or debris, but simply absent from a position where physics insisted he should still be standing. "How is this possible?" Thexanol demanded. His tactical computer, programmed with the combat patterns of 1,000 species, had no answer. The elderly human had moved faster than should have been possible for his apparent age, but speed alone couldn't explain what they were witnessing. The human had somehow anticipated the bioconstruct's movements with impossible accuracy, then executed an evasion pattern that defied tactical prediction. What the Hegemony commander didn't understand was that Marcus Chen wasn't relying on speed or technology. He was relying on something far more dangerous: experience. Marcus had learned to read enemy intentions during conflicts where misreading meant death. He could tell when an opponent was about to fire by a dozen subtle indicators: the shift in stance, the adjustment of grip, the unconscious preparation for recoil. These aliens, for all their bio-enhancements, still followed the same basic patterns of muscle tension and neural preparation that Marcus had been reading for 7 decades. "Sarah, 12 o'clock, big boy with the twitchy trigger finger," Marcus whispered into his communicator as he rolled into a crater that Frank had helpfully created with a shaped charge 3 hours earlier. "I see him," Sarah replied from her concealed position in what appeared to be an empty field. "He's getting frustrated. Watch his left shoulder drop in 3, 2, 1. The bioconstruct's massive weapon discharged, sending a beam of destructive energy through the space where Sarah had been standing. But Sarah had moved before the alien's neural impulses had even reached his trigger finger, flowing into a depression that the Hegemony's sensors had dismissed as irrelevant terrain. This was the lesson that no simulation could teach, and no enhancement could replicate. Marcus and his generation had learned to fight not just enemies, but uncertainty itself. They had fought in conflicts where intelligence was unreliable, equipment was insufficient, and victory depended on reading the subtle signs that separated life from death. Frank's voice crackled through their communication channel with scientific enthusiasm. "Marcus, I've been analyzing their movement patterns. These enhanced soldiers are predictable as clockwork. They've been programmed for efficiency, not adaptation." "Programmed how?" Marcus asked as he low-crawled through a drainage pipe that Frank had accidentally left exposed during his engineering preparations. "They're using tactical algorithms," Frank explained. "Probably very sophisticated ones, but still algorithms. They calculate optimal movement paths, firing solutions, and response patterns. Very effective against enemies who fight conventionally. Marcus emerged from the pipe behind the hegemony formation and smiled grimly, but not so effective against enemies who fight dirty. The concept of fighting dirty was one that most galactic civilizations had abandoned as they evolved beyond tribal warfare. Honor codes, rules of engagement, and technological supremacy had replaced the desperate resourcefulness that characterized primitive conflicts. But humans had never stopped being primitive. Beneath their technological achievements and cultural developments, they remained the same species that had survived ice ages, plagues, and countless predators through sheer bloody-minded determination. Sarah demonstrated this principle beautifully. While the bioconstructs were analyzing optimal firing solutions and calculating movement vectors, she was doing something far simpler. She was hunting them like animals. Her target never saw her coming. The massive alien was focused on his tactical display, coordinating with his squad members and processing battlefield data. His enhanced senses were scanning for energy signatures, movement patterns, and heat sources. But Sarah had learned to hunt humans, who were far more dangerous prey than any alien. She moved with the patient stillness of a predator, using micro-terrain and shadow patterns that no computer would consider significant. When she struck, it was with the accumulated skill of someone who had been ending lives efficiently for longer than most civilizations had existed. The bioconstruct fell without ever understanding what had killed him. One down, Sarah reported calmly, already moving to her next position. Commander Thexanol watched his tactical display with growing horror as his elite soldiers were systematically eliminated by enemies who shouldn't have posed any threat. The humans were using weapons that were primitive by galactic standards, employing tactics that violated basic military doctrine, and somehow achieving results that his best strategic computers couldn't predict. "Sir," his communications officer reported with barely controlled panic, "we're losing contact with field units. Not due to equipment failure, but due to casualties." Thexanol's worldview, built on centuries of military tradition and technological superiority, began to crumble. These humans weren't just resisting invasion, they were winning. Against impossible odds, with inferior equipment and despite being vastly outnumbered. "Request immediate reinforcements," he commanded. "Sir, High Command is monitoring our situation. They're reluctant to commit additional forces without understanding how our current units are being neutralized." On the battlefield, Marcus Chen checked his ammunition and smiled coldly. The aliens were learning the same lesson that every invader of Earth had eventually learned. Technology was useful, but experience was irreplaceable. Enhanced soldiers were formidable, but desperate humans were terrifying. And Marcus Chen had been desperate for a very long time. The hegemony had made the fundamental error of assuming that more advanced meant more dangerous. They were about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous enemy was the one who had never stopped evolving as a killer. "Frank, Sarah," Marcus called softly. "Ready for Phase 2? "Always," they replied in unison. The real lesson was about to begin. Dr. Kira Vasquez had been analyzing alien technology for 43 years before the invasion began. At 68, she was considered one of Earth's leading experts on xenotechnology, though her colleagues often dismissed her more unconventional theories. They preferred clean laboratories and controlled experiments. Kira preferred to understand how things worked in the real world, where nothing was ever clean or controlled. Now, crouched in a hastily constructed bunker, while energy weapons turned the landscape into molten glass above her head, those unconventional theories were proving their worth. "Marcus, I've got good news and bad news," she called into her communicator, while her arthritic fingers danced across a jury-rigged control panel that would have horrified any safety inspector. "Give me the bad news first," Marcus replied from somewhere in the smoking battlefield above. "The bad news is that these bioconstructs have redundant nervous systems. Even if you damage the primary neural pathways, backup systems keep them functional." Kira watched her improvised scanners track the alien soldiers' biological signatures. "They're essentially walking tanks with multiple backup systems." "And the good news?" Kira smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had spent decades finding flaws in seemingly perfect systems. "The good news is that redundant systems require massive amounts of energy to maintain, and I know exactly how to overload their biological batteries." The hegemony's bioenhancement technology was indeed impressive. Each soldier carried enough backup biological systems to survive injuries that would kill most organic beings several times over. But like all advanced systems, complexity created vulnerabilities that simpler designs avoided. Kira had discovered this principle during her early career, when corporate security forces had relied on increasingly sophisticated cyber warfare systems. The more advanced the system, the more potential failure points it contained, and failure points were opportunities for someone clever enough to exploit them. "Frank, I need you to modify your electromagnetic pulse devices," she called to the elderly engineer, not to disable their systems but to force them into overdrive. Frank's voice carried professional interest. "Overload their biological power supplies instead of shutting them down?" "Exactly. Their enhanced metabolism is designed to provide massive energy output during combat situations. But if we can trick their systems into believing they're under constant maximum stress, their own biology becomes a weapon against them," Frank finished with admiration. "Brilliant. How long do you need?" "Give me 10 minutes to recalibrate the pulse generators, then we can turn these aliens into walking time bombs." While Kira worked, the battle above continued with deadly intensity. The remaining bioconstructs had adapted their tactics somewhat, moving more cautiously and coordinating their advances with greater precision. But they were still thinking like conventional soldiers facing conventional enemies. Sarah Williams demonstrated why this was a fatal mistake. The elderly woman had positioned herself in what appeared to be an indefensible position, a shallow depression with no cover and limited escape routes. To the bioconstruct's tactical computers, she represented an easy target, isolated from support and trapped in the open. They had no way of understanding that Sarah had chosen this position specifically because it appeared indefensible. Like Marcus and the others, she had learned to think several moves ahead, to see patterns that computer analysis missed, and to turn apparent weaknesses into unexpected strengths. The bioconstructs advanced on her position with mechanical precision, their enhanced senses locked onto her heat signature, and their weapons calibrated for certain termination. Their tactical computers calculated approach vectors, firing solutions and probability matrices with mathematical perfection. But mathematics couldn't account for the fact that Sarah had been predicting enemy movement since before. These aliens had evolved intelligence. As the first bioconstruct crested the ridge above her position, Sarah triggered a device that Frank had built from agricultural equipment and mining supplies. The explosion wasn't large enough to damage the alien's armor, but it was perfectly positioned to destabilize the ridge itself. Gravity did the rest. The bioconstruct, for all its enhanced reflexes and tactical programming, couldn't compensate for the fact that the ground beneath its feet was suddenly falling away. It tumbled into the depression where Sarah had been, waiting with a weapon that would have been museum piece on any other world. But Earth's museums were filled with weapons that had proven effective against technologically superior enemies. Beta-shaped charge that Sarah detonated as the bioconstruct landed had been designed during conflicts where humans faced opponents with advanced armor and superior firepower. It focused explosive force with surgical precision, finding the gaps between armor plates that computer modeling said shouldn't exist. The bioconstruct's enhanced physiology allowed it to survive the explosion. But survival and combat effectiveness were different things entirely. "Marcus," Sarah called calmly as she moved to her next position. "One more down, but this one's still twitching." "Leave him for Kira's party," Marcus replied, understanding immediately. Kira's voice came through the communicator with scientific satisfaction. "Speaking of which, I'm ready to test my theory. Frank, activate the pulse generators on my mark." The electromagnetic pulse that swept across the battlefield was precisely calibrated to interact with the bioconstruct's enhanced nervous systems. Instead of disabling their functions, it triggered emergency response protocols that flooded their systems with combat stimulants and energy reserves. Under normal circumstances, this biological overdrive allowed the aliens to fight with superhuman intensity for brief periods. But Kira's pulse made their systems believe they were under constant attack, forcing them to maintain maximum output indefinitely. The results were spectacular. The first bioconstruct began moving with frantic energy, its enhanced muscles working at maximum capacity. Its tactical computer, receiving data that suggested imminent death from multiple sources, activated every combat protocol simultaneously. The alien spun in circles, firing at shadows and phantom threats that existed only in its overstimulated nervous system. Fascinating, Kira observed with scientific detachment. Their enhanced adrenal systems are producing combat hormones at levels that would be toxic to baseline biology. But their enhanced physiology can handle it, for a while. The second bioconstruct was experiencing similar symptoms, but its programming tried to compensate by increasing coordination with its squad members. The result was a feedback loop as multiple aliens tried to coordinate responses to threats that didn't exist, each one's panic amplifying the others. How long until their systems fail? Marcus asked as he watched the aliens' increasingly erratic behavior. Based on their metabolic rates, I'd estimate 15 minutes before complete biological collapse, Kira replied. But they'll be combat ineffective much sooner. Their tactical computers can't process the contradictory data they're receiving. Frank's voice carried professional appreciation. Kira, that's beautifully diabolical. We're not fighting their enhancements, we're making their enhancements fight themselves. This was the kind of creative problem-solving that Earth's defenders had been forced to develop over decades of asymmetric warfare. When you couldn't match your enemy's advantages directly, you found ways to turn those advantages into liabilities. Commander Thexnall watched his remaining forces dissolve into chaos and felt something his species hadn't experienced in millennia. Genuine terror. His bioconstructs were betraying every principle of enhanced soldier design, acting like panicked animals rather than disciplined warriors. But the elderly humans moved through the chaos with deadly calm, picking off disoriented aliens with clinical efficiency. They showed no excitement, no bloodlust, no emotional response to their overwhelming success. They fought like machines, but machines built by a species that had never stopped evolving as predators. Sir, his communications officer reported with disbelief.
High Command is requesting a full tactical analysis.
They don't believe our initial reports. Thexnall stared at the battlefield, display showing his elite forces being systematically destroyed by enemies who shouldn't have been able to resist a single squad. Tell High Command, he said quietly, that we have encountered something unprecedented. These humans fight like they were born for war. He had no idea how right he was. General Elena Kozlov had been dead for 3 minutes and 17 seconds according to the hegemony's bioscanners. The alien medics had confirmed it, their advanced life detection equipment showing no vital signs from the 74-year-old human lying motionless in the smoking crater. That's why nobody was prepared when she sat up and smiled. Surprise, she said pleasantly, pulling the pins from 2 grenades she had been concealing beneath her body. The hegemony soldiers had time for one moment of complete bewilderment before Elena demonstrated another lesson that Earth's warriors had perfected over decades of asymmetric warfare. Sometimes the most effective weapon was the enemy's assumption that you were harmless. The explosion eliminated the alien medical team and their escort, but more importantly, it destroyed their mobile command unit. Elena had been monitoring their communications for hours, waiting for the perfect moment to strike at their coordination center. Marcus, this is Elena, she called into her communicator as she limped away from the destruction, her supposedly lifeless body moving with practiced efficiency. Command post is down. They're flying blind now. Marcus Chen's voice carried warmth and professional appreciation. Good work, Elena. How's your heart? Still ticking, despite what these alien doctors thought. Elena checked her pulse with the casual expertise of someone who had been fooling enemy medics for 5 decades. Turns out their bioscanners can't distinguish between a cardiac arrest simulation and the real thing. This was another advantage that the hegemony couldn't compensate for with technology. Earth's defenders had learned to weaponize every aspect of human physiology, including their ability to control biological functions that most species considered involuntary. Elena had mastered cardiac rhythm control during conflicts in the 2070s, when corporate security forces had relied heavily on biometric monitoring. The ability to appear dead while remaining conscious had saved her life dozens of times. And now it was saving her planet. Sarah, Frank, Kira, Marcus called over the communication channel. Elena just eliminated their local command structure. Time for Phase 3, the response was immediate and coordinated with the precision of people who had been working together longer than most civilizations had existed. Sarah. Williams emerged from concealment near the hegemony's main supply depot, where confused alien soldiers were trying to re-establish communication with their command structure. Their enhanced senses detected her approach, but their tactical computers couldn't process what they were seeing. Sarah was walking directly toward them across open ground, making no attempt at stealth or concealment. Her elderly frame moved with the careful gait of advanced age, and she appeared to be carrying nothing more threatening than a walking stick. By every tactical analysis the aliens possessed, she represented no threat whatsoever. The first hegemony soldier to reach her lowered his weapon in confusion. "Surrender, human. You will be processed according to standard protocols." Sarah looked up at the 8-foot-tall bioconstruct, with the patient expression of a grandmother dealing with an unruly child. "Oh dear," she said gently. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The walking stick in her hand separated into 3 components with practiced efficiency. One became a projectile launcher loaded with ammunition that Frank had crafted from mining explosives. The second became a close combat weapon designed for opponents with enhanced biology. The third became a communication device that had been broadcasting their positions to Marcus and the others for the past hour. "The misunderstanding," Sarah continued as she moved with lethal grace, "is that you assumed I came here to surrender. What followed was a demonstration of combat skills that the hegemony's tactical computers couldn't analyze because they violated every assumption about elderly biology." Sarah moved through the alien squad like water through a broken dam, flowing around their enhanced reflexes and striking with precision that spoke of decades spent perfecting the art of violence. But the most disturbing aspect wasn't her physical capabilities. It was her complete emotional detachment from the process. She eliminated threats with the casual efficiency of someone performing routine maintenance, showing no anger, no excitement, no apparent emotional response to the carnage she was creating. She fought like a professional, and for humans of her generation, warfare was the profession they had been practicing their entire lives. Frank Rodriguez was demonstrating similar principles at the hegemony's equipment depot. The aliens had secured their advanced technology behind energy barriers and automated defense systems that should have been impenetrable to primitive tools, but Frank had been bypassing security systems since before the hegemony had developed energy weapons. His approach was elegantly simple. Instead of trying to overcome their defenses, he convinced their systems that he belonged there. "The problem with advanced security," he explained to his communicator as he walked through energy barriers that parted before him like curtains, "is that it's designed to stop sophisticated intrusion attempts. It's not programmed to deal with someone who just asks nicely." Frank's infiltration technique relied on understanding how artificial intelligence systems processed authorization requests. The hegemony security AI was designed to recognize and counter every known method of technological intrusion, but it had no protocols for dealing with someone who simply presented himself as authorized personnel. Frank had modified his appearance with materials from a children's costume shop, creating a crude approximation of hegemony bioarmor. The disguise wouldn't have fooled a biological observer for more than a few seconds, but artificial intelligence systems processed visual data differently than organic minds. To the security AI, Frank registered as an authorized hegemony technician with proper clearance codes. The fact that he had obtained those codes by asking a captured alien politely was irrelevant to the computer's decision-making process. "Kira," Frank called as he began placing modified devices throughout the equipment depot. "How long do you need for your surprise?" Dr. Kira Vasquez was putting the finishing touches on her most ambitious project yet. For the past 6 hours, she had been analyzing the hegemony's communication network, identifying the frequencies and protocols they used to coordinate their forces. "Give me 2 more minutes," she replied, while making final adjustments to a device that would have given galactic engineers nightmares. "I need to calibrate the feedback resonance precisely, or this won't work." Kira's plan was based on a simple principle that she had discovered during her early research into alien technology. Every advanced system was vulnerable to the same basic laws of physics that govern primitive machines. The hegemony's communication network was essentially a very sophisticated radio system, and radio systems could be manipulated by anyone who understood wave propagation and signal processing. "Marcus, when I activate this, their entire command structure is going to experience some interesting side effects," Kira warned. "Define interesting," Marcus replied as he positioned himself for the final phase of their assault. "Well, Their bio-enhancement systems rely on constant communication with central processing units for optimal function. If I can disrupt that communication in precisely the right way, their enhanced soldiers will start receiving contradictory instructions from their own bodies. Elena Kozlov's voice carried amused appreciation. You're going to make them fight themselves? More elegantly than that, Kira replied with scientific satisfaction. I'm going to make their enhancement systems believe they're under attack by their own nervous systems. The biological warfare protocols will activate, but instead of defending against external threats, they'll start defending against their own enhanced biology. Frank whistled appreciatively. That's beautifully twisted, Kira. How did you think of that? I've been studying how these enhancements interact with natural biology for months, Kira explained as she made final preparations. The hegemony's technology is impressive, but it's built on the assumption that enhanced and natural systems will always cooperate. They never considered what would happen if you convinced them they were enemies. Marcus checked his position and smiled grimly. Kira, activate your device. It's time to end this. The effect was immediate and devastating. Across the battlefield, hegemony bioconstructs began experiencing massive system failures as their enhancement packages turned against their natural biology. Artificial muscles fought against organic ones. Enhanced nervous systems conflicted with baseline neural networks, and improved organs began rejecting the bodies they were supposed to protect. But the most profound effect was psychological. The aliens had built their entire military philosophy around the superiority of enhanced biology over natural systems. Watching their most advanced soldiers defeated by their own improvements shattered fundamental assumptions about warfare, technology, and the nature of survival itself. Sarah, Elena, Frank, Marcus called as he moved toward the final objective. Time to finish what we started. These aliens need to learn the most important lesson about warfare on Earth. Which lesson is that? Sarah asked. Marcus smiled with the cold satisfaction of someone who had been teaching this lesson for 7 decades. That the most dangerous enemy is the one who never stopped learning how to kill. The final assault was about to begin. The hegemony's flagship hung in Earth's orbit like a metal mountain, its weapons capable of reducing continents to ash, and its shields strong enough to withstand the fury of dying stars. Supreme Commander Vexthul stood on the bridge, his multiple eyes fixed on the tactical displays showing the impossible defeat of his ground forces. 3 full invasion armies had been destroyed by a handful of elderly humans, using weapons that belonged in museums. The most advanced military force in galactic history had been outmaneuvered, outfought, and systematically eliminated by enemies who shouldn't have been able to resist a single squad. Commander, his tactical officer reported with barely controlled panic, we're receiving a transmission from the surface. Audio only. Display it, Vexthul commanded, his voice carrying the weight of civilizational shock. The bridge speakers crackled with the sound of an elderly human voice, calm and conversational despite the devastation he had just orchestrated. This is General Marcus Chen of the Earth Defense Force, the voice said with polite formality. I believe we need to have a conversation. Vexthul's primary arms tensed involuntarily. You are in no position to make demands, human. This fleet can reduce your world to radioactive dust. Marcus's reply carried the patience of someone explaining basic facts to a confused child. Commander, with respect, you've been making that threat for 6 months. If orbital bombardment was going to win this war, you would have used it already. The fact that you haven't suggests you need something from Earth that bombardment would destroy. The truth of this observation sent ripples of unease through the bridge crew. The hegemony hadn't conquered 1,000 worlds to leave them as lifeless ruins. They needed Earth's resources, its strategic position, and most importantly, they needed to prove that their military supremacy was absolute. A defeat here would send shockwaves through their empire that could destabilize their control over dozens of systems. What do you propose? Vexthul asked carefully. Single combat, Marcus replied without hesitation. Your best warrior against ours. Winner takes the planet. The bridge fell silent. Single combat was an ancient tradition that most galactic civilizations had abandoned millennia ago, considering it primitive and inefficient, but the concept still held cultural significance for species that remembered their warrior heritage. You would stake your world's freedom on the outcome of individual combat? Vexthul asked, unable to hide his disbelief. Commander, we've been staking our world's freedom on individual combat for the past 6 months, Marcus replied with dry humor. The difference is that now we're offering you a chance to win. Vexthul considered the proposal with growing unease. His military advisors had made it clear that continued ground operations against these humans would result in unacceptable casualties. Their tactical analysis suggested that even with overwhelming numerical superiority, victory was no longer guaranteed. But single combat offered a different kind of victory. If the hegemony's champion could defeat Earth's representative, it would prove that their technological superiority was absolute. It would demonstrate that human success had been due to luck and favorable circumstances, not genuine military capability. Very well, Vexthul decided. Single combat between champions. Our greatest bio-enhanced warrior against your chosen representative. Excellent, Marcus replied. We'll meet on the plain outside the city in 1 hour. Oh, and Commander? You might want to bring your full command staff. This will be educational. The communication ended, leaving the bridge crew to contemplate what they had just agreed to. 1 hour later, the plain outside the ruined city resembled an amphitheater. Hegemony shuttles had landed in a defensive formation, their crews establishing a perimeter around the designated combat area. Orbital scanners showed that hundreds of human observers had gathered at a respectful distance, creating an audience for the confrontation that would determine their world's fate. The hegemony's champion was a masterwork of bio-enhancement technology. Standing 12 feet tall and weighing over 600 pounds, Warrior Prime Zekthon represented the pinnacle of military engineering. His bones were reinforced with metallic compounds, his muscles enhanced with synthetic fibers, and his nervous system optimized for combat reflexes that bordered on precognitive. He had never been defeated in combat. He had never even been seriously injured. As Zekthon strode onto the battlefield, his bioscanners automatically analyzed the approaching human representative. The data that returned made him pause in confusion. His opponent was a human female who appeared to be in her mid-70s. She stood barely 5.5 feet tall, weighed perhaps 130 pounds, and moved with the careful gait of advanced age. Her weapon appeared to be a simple projectile launcher of primitive design. By every metric his enhanced systems could calculate, she posed no threat whatsoever. "I am Warrior Prime Zekthon," he announced, his voice amplified by bioacoustic enhancements. "State your designation, human." Sarah Williams looked up at the massive alien with the same expression she had worn while eliminating 3 squads of bio-constructs earlier that day. "Sarah Williams, pleased to meet you." Zekthon's tactical computers processed this information with growing confusion. This elderly human showed no signs of enhancement, no exotic technology, no apparent advantages that could compensate for the vast disparity in their physical capabilities. "Are you certain you wish to proceed?" he asked, genuinely puzzled by the human's choice of champion. "Your chances of survival are negligible," Sarah smiled with grandmotherly warmth. "Oh dear, I think you misunderstand the situation. I'm not here to survive, I'm here to win." The combat began with Zekthon's measured advance across the battlefield. His enhanced musculature allowed him to move with surprising speed for his size, closing the distance between them in seconds. His tactical computers calculated optimal strike patterns, defensive positions, and probability matrices with mathematical precision. But Sarah had vanished. Not hidden, not concealed behind cover, but simply absent from the position where physics insisted she should be standing. Zekthon's enhanced senses swept the battlefield, his bioscanners searching for heat signatures and movement patterns. He found her behind him. The projectile that struck his armor was primitive by galactic standards, but it had been crafted by Frank Rodriguez with 70 years of engineering experience. The round didn't penetrate Zekthon's enhanced armor, but it didn't need to. Instead, it delivered a payload of metallic particles that interfered with his bio-enhancement systems in ways his designers had never anticipated. Suddenly, Zekthon's enhanced reflexes were fighting against each other. His tactical computers were receiving contradictory data from sensors that Frank's particles had convinced were under attack. His enhanced muscles began working against his natural movement patterns as Kira's electromagnetic modifications created false feedback loops. "Interesting," Sarah observed clinically as she moved to her next position. "You're very impressive when your systems work properly. But every system has flaws, and I've been studying yours for months. What followed was a masterclass in asymmetric warfare that left the watching hegemony officers speechless. Sarah moved around the massive warrior like water around a stone, striking at precise points that turned his enhancements into liabilities. Each attack was surgical, targeting specific bioenhancement interfaces that forced his systems to compensate in ways that created new vulnerabilities. She fought not against his strengths but through them, using his advanced capabilities to defeat themselves. "This is impossible," Vexthal whispered from his observation position. "She's a primitive human with obsolete weapons. How is she defeating our most advanced warrior?" Dr. Kethmore, who had traveled from the council chambers to witness this confrontation, provided the answer with clinical detachment. "She's not defeating him. She's teaching him to defeat himself." The truth was more profound than the aliens could comprehend. Sarah wasn't trying to overpower Zekthan's enhanced biology. She was demonstrating that enhancement without understanding created weakness, that advanced technology without wisdom was a liability, and that the most dangerous opponent was one who had learned to turn strength against itself. When Zekthan finally fell, his bioenhancement systems overloaded by their own attempts to compensate for Sarah's attacks, the battlefield fell silent. Sarah Williams stood over the defeated champion, breathing heavily but victorious. She looked up at the assembled hegemony officers with the same patient expression she had worn throughout the combat. "Gentlemen," she said politely, "I believe this concludes our business, unless you'd like to discuss terms of withdrawal." Supreme Commander Vexthal stared at the impossible scene before him, and felt something his species had engineered out of their military caste millennia ago. Humility. These humans had proven that experience was more valuable than enhancement, that wisdom trumped technology, and that the most advanced warriors in the galaxy were the ones who had never stopped learning how to fight. "Dr. Kethmore," he said quietly, "prepare a full report for the Galactic Council. I believe our understanding of warfare needs significant revision." As the hegemony forces prepared to withdraw from Earth's orbit, Sarah Williams walked slowly back toward her comrades, her shoulders aching from the combat. "Combat," Marcus replied without hesitation. "Your best warrior against ours. Winner takes the planet." The bridge fell silent. Single combat was an ancient tradition that most galactic civilizations had abandoned millennia ago, considering it primitive and inefficient. But the concept still held cultural significance for species that remembered their warrior heritage. "You would stake your world's freedom on the outcome of individual combat?" Vexthal asked, unable to hide his disbelief. "Commander, we've been staking our world's freedom on individual combat for the past 6 months," Marcus replied with dry humor. "The difference is that now we're offering you a chance to win." Vexthal considered the proposal with growing unease. His military advisors had made it clear that continued ground operations against these humans would result in unacceptable casualties. Their tactical analysis suggested that even with overwhelming numerical superiority, victory was no longer guaranteed. But single combat offered a different kind of victory. If the hegemony's champion could defeat Earth's representative, it would prove that their technological superiority was absolute. It would demonstrate that human success had been due to luck and favorable circumstances, not genuine military capability. "Very well," Vexthal decided. "Single combat between champions. Our greatest bioenhanced warrior against your chosen representative." "Excellent," Marcus replied. "We'll meet on the plain outside the city in 1 hour. Oh, and Commander, you might want to bring your full command staff. This will be educational." The communication ended, leaving the bridge crew to contemplate what they had just agreed to. 1 hour later, the plain outside the ruined city resembled an amphitheater. Hegemony shuttles had landed in a defensive formation, their crews establishing a perimeter around the designated combat area. Orbital scanners showed that hundreds of human observers had gathered at a respectful distance, creating an audience for the confrontation that would determine their world's fate. The hegemony's champion was a masterwork of bioenhancement technology. Standing 12 feet tall and weighing over 600 pounds, Warrior Prime Zekthan represented the pinnacle of military engineering. His bones were reinforced with metallic compounds, his muscles enhanced with synthetic fibers, and his nervous system optimized for combat reflexes that bordered on precognitive. He had never been defeated in combat. He had never even been seriously injured. As Zekthan strode onto the battlefield, His bioscanners automatically analyzed the approaching human representative. The data that returned made him pause in confusion. His opponent was a human female who appeared to be in her mid-70s. She stood barely 5.5 feet tall, weighed perhaps 130 pounds, and moved with the careful gait of advanced age. Her weapon appeared to be a simple projectile launcher of primitive design. By every metric his enhanced systems could calculate, she posed no threat whatsoever. "I'm Warrior Prime Zekthon," he announced, his voice amplified by bioacoustic enhancements. "State your designation, human." Sarah Williams looked up at the massive alien with the same expression she had worn while eliminating 3 squads of bioconstructs earlier that day. "Sarah Williams, pleased to meet you." Zekthon's tactical computers processed this information with growing confusion. This elderly human showed no signs of enhancement, no exotic technology, no apparent advantages that could compensate for the vast disparity in their physical capabilities. "Are you certain you wish to proceed?" he asked, genuinely puzzled by the human's choice of champion. "Your chances of survival are negligible." Sarah smiled with grandmotherly warmth. "Oh dear. I think you misunderstand the situation. I'm not here to survive. I'm here to win." The combat began with Zekthon's measured advance across the battlefield. His enhanced musculature allowed him to move with surprising speed for his size, closing the distance between them in seconds. His tactical computers calculated optimal strike patterns, defensive positions, and probability matrices with mathematical precision. But Sarah had vanished. Not hidden, not concealed behind cover, but simply absent from the position where physics insisted she should be standing. Zekthon's enhanced senses swept the battlefield, his bioscanners searching for heat signatures and movement patterns. He found her behind him. The projectile that struck his armor was primitive by galactic standards, but it had been crafted by Frank Rodriguez with 70 years of engineering experience. The round didn't penetrate Zekthon's enhanced armor, but it didn't need to. Instead, it delivered a payload of metallic particles that interfered with his bioenhancement systems in ways his designers had never anticipated. Suddenly, Zekthon's enhanced reflexes were fighting against each other. His tactical computers were receiving contradictory data from sensors that Frank's particles had convinced were under attack. His enhanced muscles began working against his natural movement patterns as Kira's electromagnetic modifications created false feedback loops. "Interesting," Sarah observed clinically as she moved to her next position. "You're very impressive when your systems work properly, but every system has flaws, and I've been studying yours for months." What followed was a masterclass in asymmetric warfare that left the watching hegemony officers speechless. Sarah moved around the massive warrior like water around a stone, striking at precise points that turned his enhancements into liabilities. Each attack was surgical, targeting specific bioenhancement interfaces that forced his systems to compensate in ways that created new vulnerabilities. She fought not against his strengths but through them, using his advanced capabilities to defeat themselves. "This is impossible," Vexthul whispered from his observation position. "She's a primitive human with obsolete weapons. How is she defeating our most advanced warrior?" Dr. Kethmore, who had traveled from the council chambers to witness this confrontation, provided the answer with clinical detachment. "She's not defeating him. She's teaching him to defeat himself." The truth was more profound than the aliens could comprehend. Sarah wasn't trying to overpower Zekthon's enhanced biology. She was demonstrating that enhancement without understanding created weakness, that advanced technology without wisdom was a liability, and that the most dangerous opponent was one who had learned to turn strength against itself. When Zekthon finally fell, his bioenhancement systems overloaded by their own attempts to compensate for Sarah's attacks, the battlefield fell silent. Sarah Williams stood over the defeated champion, breathing heavily but victorious. She looked up at the assembled hegemony officers with the same patient expression she had worn throughout the combat. "Gentlemen," she said politely, "I believe this concludes our business, unless you'd like to discuss terms of withdrawal?" Supreme Commander Vexthul stared at the impossible scene before him and felt something his species had engineered out of their military caste millennia ago: humility. These humans had proven that experience was more valuable than enhancement, that wisdom trumped technology, and that the most advanced warriors in the galaxy were the ones who had never stopped learning how to fight. "Dr. Kethmore," he said quietly, "prepare a full report for the Galactic Council. I believe our understanding of warfare needs significant revision. As the hegemony forces prepared to withdraw from Earth's orbit, Sarah Williams walked slowly back toward her comrades, her shoulders aching from the combat but her spirit satisfied with work well done. Marcus Chen met her halfway across the battlefield, his weathered face showing the pride of a commander whose faith in his people had been vindicated. "How do you feel?" he asked. Sarah considered the question with the thoughtfulness of someone who had spent 7 decades perfecting the art of survival. "Old," she said finally, "but not obsolete." Behind them, the last of the alien ships disappeared into the starfield, carrying with them a lesson that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of warfare itself. Earth's defenders had proven that the most dangerous weapon in the universe wasn't technology, or enhancement, or superior firepower. It was experience, and humans had more of that than any species in the galaxy.